Good afternoon to everybody that is joining us today on the Vivid webinar. We want to welcome you from wherever you are today in the world. And since Vivid is the worldwide independent microfocus software user group community forum, we want to again thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us for this exciting webinar. I actually had a chance last week to get a sneak preview at some of the information that will be shared with us today. And you folks are in for a really great time to see how this reusable automated testing framework integrates and leverages the microfocus UFT solution. Next slide. So again, just a reminder that this webinar is sponsored by Vivid, and specifically the TQA Special Interest Group, the Testing Quality and ALM Special Interest Group. As part of our Special Interest Group leadership team, we have Andreas Burke, and Andreas has many decades of experience in the software development and test processing arena. Mia is also with us from Accenture. He's one of our leaders in the Special Interest Group, and myself, obviously Robert Linton. And then Christopher Scher, who also has a lot of experience with the mainframe and web-based test automation, and has also sat on the Vivid board in several capacities. Next slide. So again, I am your host today, and I will be with you during the entire webinar, and I'll be trying to work with Brent to answer some of the questions after the webinar. We'll get to as many of those as we can. My background is simply I've been in software development for over 30 years, and specifically working with the microfocus HPE Mercury solutions for about 20 years. And I look forward to Brent's webinar and the explanation on how they leverage UFT. Next slide. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brent Westwood, who also has many years of development experience in the development arena, and then switched over the last 8 years to get more involved in the test automation, leveraging microfocus ALM solutions such as ALM, UFT, QTP, Sprinter, and even Performance Center. You're in good hands today with Brent and his information on how to use an automated framework with UFT. So you're in for a real treat. Next slide, please. So just a little housekeeping, always to keep in mind when you attend these Vivid webinars. This is a live session. It is being recorded. And these recordings, along with the questions and answers, which will be gathered during this webinar, will be shared with all Vivid members afterwards. And once we have the recording and the questions and answers ready, we will send all the registered attendees of this webinar a link, and they'll be able to go back in and review this and look at some of the questions and answers. For your questions and answers, there's a panel on the right side of the screen. If we go to the next slide. This is an example of the webinar control panel. And in the middle, towards the bottom, there's a section there called questions. And to expand it, you have to click on the arrow, the right arrow that is next to the word questions. And when you click on that, then it will expand down and open up that questions panel, which is where you folks that have questions as we go through the webinar can enter your questions. We'll monitor your questions during the webinar, and then we'll try to have some time at the end of the webinar, time permitting, to answer as many of those questions as we can get to. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brent and let him get started. Brent, it's all yours.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Today I want to share with you what we've done at Southern Company, how we've approached automated testing, and the framework that we've created for automated testing. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have some demonstration to show the framework, right, and UFT in action. What is Southern Company? Southern Company is a leading energy company based out of Atlanta. We have operating companies in 4 states and also deal with distribution of gas, serving 9 million customers, wholesale energy across the United States. Okay, so our approach to automated testing. First, we will assess the automated testing request and determine if it's suitable by find the application with UFT, as well as finding out if it's going to be something that's used quite often. The test will be run over and over again, or many transactions or iterations. And if we find that to be true, then we would supply a framework and build out some examples and hand that off to someone who would go forth with that framework and build from those examples. As I mentioned, we want to definitely make sure that what we're building will be something of value, will be used for a while and many times over, so that we can get a return on investment. The more times it is used, the more money we will save by not using man hours, and thereby getting a return on our investment, and then basically just saving money over time. We illustrate that to our business users by numbers and graphical means. As you can show here in these examples, that over the test runs or over time, that the manual testing that was done would, if that manual testing was done, that would cost more and more and more. But the automated testing is going to be a pretty much unattended runs and not costing much time for any number of individuals. We also make sure to keep up our information on help in using the tool, have our links to the microfocus sites, UFT help, ALM help, keep up our installation instructions as we install and move forward with the different versions of UFT, and any kind of special setup like with Chrome, as far as keeping Chrome from updating on its own until we're ready for it to update. When we get a new release of UFT, like 14.5.1 being compatible with Chrome 71. And we have documentation on our framework on how to use it and the functionality it provides. Also, if there's some keys to success, we certainly need to be in good contact with our developers. Hopefully they can set up the elements that they've and controls on screens that are identifiable. And if they don't do that, we can request them to make updates like applying an HTML ID to the objects. We need to definitely have well-defined manual tests and know what we're doing. We need to have access to the database if we can have it, so we can get data as well as verify that any updates we make through the application are actually saved to the database and not just in memory on the application or something like that. We also want to have IDs, different IDs we can use that are not our own personal IDs, such that we can log in with different IDs and test out different security roles to the application. So some people might be just to have read access and others more administrative access, and we want to test out those scenarios in our testing. So now we'll talk about the framework. We wanted to create a framework that almost anyone could understand, where it was readable to people so they could, definitely see exactly what the test was going to do, as well it allows for, everybody understanding, doing it the same way, and we can each support each other in the different tests that we are writing against different applications. We want to be able to make it flexible to make it easy to develop. And so as we build out our steps of our test, our instructions to the automation, we can then test that out and skip those and start at a certain point in the test. Start in the middle, at the end, wherever to, as we build along, we can just keep on adding to our test and not have to rerun the whole test every time. We wanted to make it where people didn't have to know how to code. There's an engine behind it, but with most people that would be doing the testing, they would just be writing the instructions, and the most technical thing they need to know how to do would be how to identify elements on a screen. So if they can understand the objects and the properties and identifying elements with UFT, that's the main thing they need to know. The other part is writing a test, a lot like writing a manual test. We wrote the code for interacting with various elements at one time. That is easier to manage. We reuse the UFT repository objects. So we try to, if the application is developed consistently, then we may have one web edit object, one link object, and so things like that we just reuse and replace. So primary value allows us to identify that object. We also wanted to be able to supply test parameters at the test set level. So any test could get a particular parameter value that it needed to use, as well as tests can generate values and be used by any other test. And if a test, whenever the test ends and we need to run it again or run from the middle of one test, we have those values still. They're not lost at the end of the run. They're not just saved in memory. We want to create one way of reporting. We report on every step that we've run and do screenshots at particular points that of interest. Not every single step, but each time we've filled out a screen or navigated from one screen to another or saved a record. This one type of reporting is consistent gets across all of our projects. So if people are involved in multiple projects, they'll be able to understand the output. And this also helps with the error handling. So anytime something fails, we report on exactly what test and step that where it failed, so we can go right back to our test and see that exact spot. We also report on the properties that we were using to try to identify an object that we could not find, and that helps us understand if the object had changed or if we had identified it incorrectly or not well enough, and we can fix that problem, and then we can use our ability to skip steps and start from the point of the failure and run from there and ensure the rest of the test works. And of course, later on, we would run the whole test over again, but we can fix one thing and move on. Okay, so what we created. So here's a look at what a test would look like that would just be logging into an application. We've got our ability to skip the steps on the far left. We have ability to call functions, common functions like closing all the browsers to clean the desktop, launch a browser where we provide variable values like what type of browser, like IE or Chrome, and the URL to the application. And we have the ability to take screenshots and give some information on what we're taking a screenshot of and values that were used at the time. In the middle, we have our application objects that we use, in which we define them by what page, what the object, and the type of object. We do that based on how the person would see it. They would recognize the page as the login page, and then recognize the object controlling the screen as a username, password, and a login button. And then when we click the login, we verify that we've gotten to the home page to, that will tell us that it's a successful login. So we try to make it really easy to read, and so if people follow the standards, other people can come back behind another person, or if someone leaves the company and a new tester comes in, they should be able to understand what the test is doing. So the framework is composed of a help worksheet. You got to define all the operations and things that we have available to us with the framework. We have an application objects worksheet to define our objects, map over to the UFT repository objects that we reuse. We have a variables worksheet, which is basically a table storing all of our variables that we create in the beginning manually, as well as anything that we create on the fly with the test. We have a test set worksheet, which will have all of our tests and our test worksheets. So our help, we keep up to date to all our abilities, all our actions that we have, all our functions we have, and how to use them, as well as how to use the different worksheets in the framework. We also have some template values like username or machine name or like now for dates, which will automatically translate into values using the environment value features of UFT. They'll get username or machine that you're using, and using date functions to come back like with the now, so you have like a timestamp, which is valuable using quite frequently. Our application object worksheet defines our objects, our page, object, label, and type are how we see it on the screen, and then we will map that to our UFT repository object that we're going to use, which will have the object class like web edit, web list, link, and then the identifying property and value that we supply to that object. As I said, the variables will store our values that we defined initially, like global object wait time or login IDs, or URLs, database connection information that we're going to use for querying the database or the application, and the other variables that we create dynamically. Our test worksheet will have our test name, a description, and a column for any comments. Also list the last run and result. So we can see the last time we ran that test, and if it was a pass or a fail, and if there were any failures, it will provide the error details. Our test worksheet lists all of our steps, obviously, and now we have seen the ability to call functions, and we have the ability to interact with elements on the screen through our actions, where you can send like click events or enter values or extract values from a property and element. Makes a lot of noise. And then we have the ability to skip any test, so we can start in the middle of a test or run just particular steps of a test. Very flexible there. So once we know about our framework, there are pretty much 4 steps to building out our test or test steps. So we first determine what objects we need. So we would pull up a screen and identify those objects, see what types of objects they are, and what property is best to identify them, hopefully an HTML ID, or maybe unique name property or enter text. Then once we've got a UFT repository object, basically a generic object that we reuse, we will then create our application objects that will map to it. And those application objects, again, are going to be the page object and type that a person would understand by looking at the screen itself. And we use those to plug into our test steps and apply actions to them, as well as call functions as we need. So, for example, here's another login test where we have the username and password and sign-in button that we all need to interact with in order to log in. And then we have something that we will use to identify that we've gotten to the initial landing page or home page. If we look at the username or password fields, we might find that they are a web edit type of object, and they both have a name property that we can use, and we may use a regular expression such that we'll just take the unique part of that name, and we'll define our one UFT object that we use for our text boxes and give it a name that, basically says this is a text box that we're going to identify objects by the name property using regular expressions. So then we can build our application objects, and when we use this same repository object for both the username and password. And as we go through the application, we should find more text boxes that we can do the same, that reuse the same UFT repository object with. So now we've mapped our login username and login password to that UFT repository object. We also have our sign-in button that was signed up to be an image, and using the same kind of technique, we key off of that. We find that object by the name property using the regular expression. But then we take our application objects and we put them into a test step. So we have our login username text box, our login password text box, and then we apply appropriate actions to them like enter text and enter password. And we provide values, which these values here inside these brackets mean that it's a variable. So we would define those on our variables worksheet so we can reuse them, and this will translate into an actual value and plug in the values on the screen. And then we have the sign-in button, and we're just going to send a click event to it, and it should log in, and we'll look for the homepage image on that landing screen. We also have other features that we can, in the framework, as shown on this screen, we are actually defining a name here to enter to a text box, and we'll save that to a variable. We give that variable a name. It will be now stored in the variables worksheet, and when it's called later on, it can be called by a value put in the bracket, and it'll translate back into that value that we used before. So we verify that record is, or that name is displayed after we saved this record into the application. And then we can also query the database and see if we can get the record ID for that unique name that we created. And we should only get one result. If we get that one result, then the test will continue. Otherwise, it will throw a failure and report on that. Obviously meaning that the record didn't actually save to the database. But if it does save, then we'll get a new variable, which will be the ID, and then we later on here show that we are searching for that record in the application by its ID. So that's just this is a screen here. It's basically showing you how we can create the variables on the fly, reuse them, as well as make it simple to query the database. Simple and obvious. When we run the report, we have a familiar UFT test run result report, and since we report on every step that we perform, and every step knows the variables that it was using and the well-defined names of the application objects, it will read out exactly what it did as far as like entering text into the username, entering text into the password, clicking the sign in button, found the home page, and then anywhere there's a screenshot, we will be able to see the screenshots. So we can go through this and see every single step it took. There's nothing happening that inside the code that it's doing that it's not reporting on, basically. So it's not like where you wrote a script and it ran the whole test, but you don't know everything that it did within that script. This is really telling you exactly what it did. Then if we filter by screenshot, where we put that same value in every time we take a screenshot, we can quickly go through the reporter steps and see all of our screens that we took a screenshot. So we put them at particular points so we can quickly review the test that way. Okay, so at this point I'm going to perform a demonstration of the tool actually working live, hopefully. Actually, since we just looked at the one result view, it's probably hard to see, but here's an example of how the report comes out, which is a nice feature of the framework, and how it's telling you everything it did, and now we can look at the screenshot. So if we filter by screenshot, if we ran through a test, I did use an old one result view. Okay, we'll create another one. Okay, so here is a test set that we have set up where we're going to run in IE and then run in Chrome. So we just change our browser type to IE or Chrome as we go through it. And we have our variable here that will be toggled each time we do call that save variable routine. We'll have a login where we'll close all our browsers. We'll launch a browser to our current browser type and the URL for the application. We'll log in, entering a username and password, clicking the login button, and then we'll verify that something on the landing page exists. So if we look at the application we're going to work with, what this is doing we would identify our objects. So we have two web edits, and we would find we have an HTML ID. That's the first thing we'd hope for. We do for that one. And we have some stuff before was kind of a unique identifier, something we understand here. And we would use that value to plug into our reusable object. So if we plug in the values, of course I just did this on physics. Okay. And if we look for password, we'll see that it found it. So what we're doing there is using this one object for two different text boxes. And do the same type of thing for our image that's on the screen. We'd have hopefully one object that we get to use for images. Now we've identified these three fields. And we would create our application objects where we name them as understandable as possible. And we map them to their UFT objects by primary property, which we will plug in that value here. If that ever changed, we could just change in this one spot. Or if we want to dynamically pass in values from a test, we actually have that ability as well. And then we would take our three application objects that we created, and we would perform actions against them, entering the values, clicking, and supply values, literal value or a variable. These variables are defined here. And then once we've clicked the login button, we would want to verify when the home page exists, and then we could take a screenshot of it. So next thing we would verify is like this image exists. And that's what we've done here. We found it by the inner text, so it's a link. And then we may create a test where we search for different values, make sure they exist. We'll save each value as a different variable, and we can use that as we report on it. So let's look for one that doesn't exist first and see what kind of screen is there. So we do something like this, and we expect this no data found. And then we're going to look for a value that does exist. Search for it, and verify that we can find the result. That's a link. And we can find that one by inner text. And if we've defined a way to look for links by inner text, then we'd use that UFT repository object. And if we create an object for that, like the search result link, we'll map it to our link by inner text UFT object using the inner text property. And just we're using that because we're going to look for various search results, so we don't know, we're not going to hard code that value. We say this parameter value. And so when we look for that, we send that in the value name. Application object which will supply it to UFT and find the link. Find the link and drill into like an actual screen and make sure the function. And then we can repeat for a few different entities that we're looking for. Just test out the search mechanism. And on the final one, maybe we don't drill in, but we just we can search for something and just close this advanced search. Again, that would be a link. And maybe we found that one by HTML ID. And that's how we would identify that object. And then in the end, we want to log out. So we look out for the logout link. So if we look to see what that is, the link inner text. So we have our menu link here that we called it. It's a link type of object to UFT, and we'll just find it by the inner text. And we call it here. And then call a function to close all browsers. So let's take a quick look at some functionality and how to build it. I have my test set now. I can run through it. It should launch IE. It should log in, do those searches, log out, then launch Chrome, log in, do those searches again, and log out. I'll just click the save button here because anytime you change the repository playing around, it's going to enable it to save, and not really changing anything, but don't pay attention to that. So this tool obviously queries the spreadsheet or worksheets, and so it loads that up and it sets some variables, and then it starts working on all the tests in the test set one by one. So it goes for each test set, it's going to look to the test. It'll find the test in the test set, and then it'll find the details for the test and run through those, and then run to the next test. it's configurable to stop at the first failure or continue on to the next test. So once a failure happens in the test, it will fail that test and report on it, and then move on to the next test. There should be any failures here, so just demonstrating that going through and reusing our test and testing out through two different browsers. We're partway through the Internet Explorer test. Here it's found via partial search. It finds the record that's at the bottom of the screen. I believe this will be the last record it looks for. I'm going to close the advanced search, click log out, and close the browsers. This whole operation should take about maybe longer. Now it's closed. By the way, with UFT 1 or Chrome that has a recent update, there are a couple of flags that change to get Chrome to be recognizable. I've run into that with previous versions of UFT, just in case anybody's had problems with Chrome. I'm showing that it does work. You just have to change a couple flags and relaunch. Get it to work again. At the end of all this, we will look at the run result report, and I'll show how we can filter on reporter statements to see all the steps that it took, which also provide any information like the variables that we used and finding the name of the steps, what objects we used. And then we can filter on the screenshots to quickly look at all the screens that we want to take a capture of. We've gotten to the end of this test here. Now we're going to close that advanced search, log out, and close the browsers, and we'll generate a report. It's always nice to see and going tests. You don't have to do them over and over again, or have to request fixes or report defects. If we filter here on our reporter statements, then we see all the steps that we've taken that map back to the row in the spreadsheet. So like if we say, click on the login button on step 6 of the login test, go back over here and I look at our login test, that's the exact instruction. So it's going to be like the row that it shows in Excel. And as you can see, we have one test to set the browser to IE, then log in, then search, log out, then set to Chrome, log in, search, and log out. And all these individual tests are reported into one run result. So if you maybe had a number of tests inside of a test set in ALM 12.5, using like the BPT or something, each one of those tests would be a separate report. And you'd have to open up, let's say, 6 different reports. Whereas in this manner of doing it, you can see everything at once. And you can certainly just look at the test that you're interested in or whatever you're interested in, but you get it all in one output. If we filter by screenshot, now I can quickly look at the major steps of interest and see what exactly I did. And see that everything looks the same, both in IE and Chrome, everything worked. Also, another thing that we can do, if I can get to my technical difficulty getting to a Word document at this moment. If we want to output our reports, and we define a XSL, so we export that. Give it a name. We have a CSS file here in the folder where we put it. We reference that CSS file, which would be in our UFT directory usually. And if we open this, we can have a nice HTML report to put on a SharePoint site or put on a shared drive or something to give to people who don't have access to UFT or ALM. So you see every step is listed here, and then each time there's a screenshot. So a major feature of this framework is the output. And if you want to make those screenshots bigger, you just click on them. They're all individual PNG files. And you can click the back arrow to go back to your report or left browser back button. Good. There you go. Now, I showed you one application with using Chrome and IE. But if we were, the power of this tool is that we can actually, go use any kind of, basically any other web application we have access to. So if we use this other one here, I can build a test for it. So we're running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to have to do this quickly. Let's say we want to create a login for a different application. We close our browsers, we launch our browser. We use our same username and passwords for this app, because it really does have the same properties inside the text box, the username and password. Of course, we have a different image or link or something to see on the home page. So once we've logged into that application, we would see our see here. For example, here's a different application. We log in and we would look for this link. We find it by inner text. So we want to log into this application. We can use our login objects. What would be different is our homepage link that we find, verify that it's there. And then the next thing we do, this operation that I would perform, is showing how to add a record. And we go to this screen and click Add New. Identify these objects. And find that record that we created. So it's good to see where you're, adding records and then verifying that those records exist. So if I add the objects for that, get our application groups header that we find, and we click on the left-hand link of Add New link to get to the screen where we can enter a new application group. We have our group name and purpose we're going to fill in here, and our Save button we're going to click, and then we're going to find that application group in the search result or the table that lists on the main page. Okay, then we define our steps. So on the home page, we want to click the link that will take us to this application groups page. To verify that page exists, take a screenshot. Click the Add New button on that page. Verify that the Add Application Group page display. Take a screenshot there. Then we want to add a new group, but we might want to create a unique value. So we'll just create a timestamp, add that to like demo, add that variable. Then we'll enter that into we'll enter this value with the timestamp into our name, so we have a unique name. Type in a purpose, click the save button, verifies it back to the group screen, and then we'll look for that group being in the list of new groups or all the groups that exist in the system. Then we can query the database to see that, because we created a unique name, we should only have one record by that name, and there's a constraint on that name in the database anyway, so it would have to be a unique name. If we get one result back on a count of looking for that name, then we know that we've actually fed the database. And lastly, we may click on that link just to verify. We can click on that name and get to the screen that shows details about that group. So now if we want to call those tests, we have to put them in our test set. And then we don't need to run these other tests right now, so we can skip those. And if we were developing along, we would have usually built this part and skip, and then you can type skips in here and it'll skip any step. So a lot of time. So now we have our login. We have application group, add procedure. We've added them to the test set. We have a variable for the URL. Use the same login ID. We have all of our application objects, hopefully. And we'll give it a try. It'll take a couple minutes to review the questions.
We can while this demo is running. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. There was some concern about muting and unmuting. So obviously this is a very robust framework and something that is very well orchestrated for use there at Southern Company. One of the questions that we have is from Chris. Shout out to Chris. Does the Southern Company keep any metrics on how many visits their training and help portal gets monthly? So, do you keep track of any of the interactions of the users or the testers or the developers accessing, and do you keep track of those metrics?
No, not any metrics on how to. Well, keep metrics on like our executions of tests, or we used to, where we had a certain amount of development time put into the test, and then each time the test is run, there'd be a particular savings for them, and a little bit of savings anytime we found a defect by running those tests. Most all of our tests are regression tests. So as those are run over and over, we see where we're, how we're doing on the return on investment per project or application.
Good. Okay. So you are keeping some metrics about the runs and the executions. We have a question here from Mila. What version of UFT are you using there at Southern Company?
Well, a lot of us probably are on 14.2 or 3, but this demo has been in 14.5.1, which I believe is the very latest at this point in time.
Right. So you're staying current with the UFT product. Good. Well, we have another question here from Ron. And Ron wants to know, how long have you been using the framework? And So that's the first part of the question. And then, have you captured any cost savings through the use of the framework over record and replay the traditional way? So the first question is, how long have you and Southern Company been using the framework?
Since 2015. That's when I had the initial versions of it and used it myself to begin with, and then pass it on to other automotive. So there's the kids contractors and used it, and we can hand it off to them, and we train them on that and have them use this framework and support tests already written and add to them.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Has the company kept track of any metrics on time savings or cost savings?
Well, we do that with some of our reusable tools, anything that we develop, but we don't actually have any metrics on, how this has saved us. But the number of contractors have come in and used it, so we definitely have like a game plan when people come in, how we want them to develop automated tests. And so that's we don't have a number value for that. It's more of a feeling of, like comfort, like we have this is what we're using, this is what we can train people on. They can, once they understand this, they'll be able to support other projects because the other projects use the same mechanism.
Okay, well, we appreciate that answer. We have quite a few questions from Andre. We're not going to have time to get to all of them because we are slowly running out of time here, but one of his questions is it possible to have global keywords, like a single keyword to do the same action on a list of fields across the application? So we saw that you had, variables and you had values in those variables, but is it possible to have global keywords that could get reused?
Well, the action is the keyword, and that's definitely reused. If the variable is the item, then those are reused across any test that you build in the same worksheet. So there's a lot of reuse of values, and there's one action to call for any click event and one action to call for any enter text event and things like that. Reusable functions. If you want to have like a list of values to supply and run through and do the same thing with those different values, like a data set to use to feed into a test, I would say that we don't have that with this tool, but that's one of the things that we have like on the list of enhancements. We could have a particular type of worksheet that would have those values and then supply that as a parameter to a test. One version of this, actually a newer version of this framework, has the ability to call tests within a test. So like you call like that in a test. That way it doesn't have to be like a separate test within a test set like the log in, the log out was, but you would call the login from the entity search at the beginning and the log out at the end, and it would be like one item sitting here. So that's kind of related, but I don't know if I answered the question partly.
Yeah, I think you did. So one last question, and then we're going to have to probably close out the webinar. ALM integration. How is the test and or the test results, captured in ALM?
Well, so if we run this test, then we would select a test set in the ALM project in which we want the result to save. So we would have this UFT test in a test set, and then we could select it. And then when you run that, the results would be saved in ALM.
Okay. Well, it's now 7 minutes after the hour. I think that we thank you for all the information and the demo and the presentation that you gave to us today, Brent. All the other questions that we didn't have time to get to will be answered, and that information will be available in the link that gets sent to you, the attendees, by Vivid as part of your registering for this webinar. And Brent, if you would kindly switch back over to the Vivid slide.
Okay. I know there's one question about what happens if there's an error. Here's a big test set with tests with thousands of lines of steps, and we'll have here, like you see, step 602 defines what went wrong, so you know that exact step, and then you know the properties of the object that it was trying to interact with, so you know exactly what that object is and what values it was trying to use, and you could figure out, why I couldn't find it from that. So that's what it looks like with some errors.
So that information gets stored in that information gets stored in the sheet that was used for the test run, correct?
Yeah, and it would be in the run result report as well.
Okay,
the same value that would show in the run result report. Okay, so rotation. Okay, well, thanks.
So again, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this the slide that you would like to be on?
Sorry?
Am I showing the slide that you would like to?
Yes, Brent. Thank you. So again, thank you very much, Brent. Thank you to the attendees for taking time out of their busy days to join us for this very informative webinar. We, Vivid and Microfocus, just want to remind you that there is an ITOM Summit February 5th through 7th at the Hilton Resort in Phoenix, Arizona. And you can certainly register using that link that you see here on this slide. And this information probably will also be broadcasted on the Vivid website. And you might get other emails inviting you to consider registering for this event. Next slide. So again, as part of the Vivid organization, we try to keep track of all the events that we're helping sponsor and participate in. So here are two upcoming Vivid events still in the month of January. One is the Florida Lug event, which is going to be held in the Tampa Bay area. And you can certainly get information here on this link. And then there's another group on the 31st that's a German group. And unless you speak or read German, Testen and Test Management mit Produkten from Microfocus in München, that might not be as interesting unless you can speak or read German. But go to the Vivid website. There are all kinds of upcoming events coming in February, March, April as we move through this year. And next slide. Again, we want to thank you very much. And if you would be kind enough to take this short survey so that our Vivid leaders can better get the feedback from you and serve you better in the future, we'd appreciate it very much. Again, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day and enjoy your time in whatever part of the world you're sitting in today. Bye for now. See you next time. Bye.